Is it possible to relive an operation in your subconscious? Just try to keep it as long as you can. Can your mind shut out the pain of extreme cold? Fixate. How does the right eye trick the left hand? The mind, hidden and divided. This time on Discovering Psychology. Consider an ordinary operation under anesthesia. The patient is unconscious. All indicators are normal. But then the surgeon finds a growth that could be malignant. He says out loud that the patient may have cancer. Fortunately, it's a false alarm. The growth is benign. The operation is successful and the prognosis is excellent. The patient should feel fine in a few days, but for some reason, she doesn't. The patient became listless and moody after the operation. No one could understand why, least of all her. Finally, as her depression deepened, she sought help from a therapist who decided to use hypnosis to explore the cause of her problem. As the patient relived the operation in her mind, the truth came out. Even though she had been unconscious, she had heard the surgeon say that she might have cancer. This news was so traumatic that it plunged her into depression, even though it turned out to be false. The surgeon's comment had been buried in her subconscious mind, normally unavailable to our conscious awareness, unless retrieved by special methods, such as hypnosis. In experiments following this case, both negative and positive messages were given by anesthesiologists to different surgery patients while they were under anesthesia. None of the patients reported any awareness of what happened during the operation. However, under hypnosis, some of those exposed to negative messages gave an almost verbatim account of the anesthesiologist's comments, while others showed extreme anxiety. Another group of patients who were exposed to positive comments during their operations needed smaller amounts of painkillers after surgery, and were discharged earlier than those in groups who heard only silence or music during their operations. We should note, however, that subconscious processing during anesthesia is complex and difficult to demonstrate reliably. This phenomenon of subconscious awareness raises some profound questions about the nature of the human mind and how it functions to tune us into or out of the world around us. Can events and experiences taking place below the level of consciousness really alter our moods, bias our actions, and even change our health? And why are we unaware of what this hidden consciousness knows? In Western civilization, it has been traditionally held that reason, free choice, and carefully weighed decisions guide our actions. We assume that we have ready access to our most significant thoughts, feelings, and memories, that it is truly possible to know thyself. At the same time, the brain has been seen as a monolithic command center that can know everything because it is master of all it surveys. But recent experiments in neuroscience suggest an alternative conception. It seems that our brains are organized into many separate mini-brains, or cognitive modules. Each of these is designed to do a specific job, such as speaking, or reading, or drawing. Moreover, our minds are devoted to concealing some truths we would rather not face, either unpleasant memories or even current experiences. And so, to know thyself, one needs to explore the murky realm of the unconscious and the subconscious, where consciousness can take on various disguises. Throughout history, people have been fascinated and frightened by the idea of a sudden transformation of identity from our conscious selves to something beyond our control, as shown here in an early film version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We see this notion in tales of witches' potions and voodoo possession, in stories of the devil who takes over and directs the souls of his victims. And we see it in the carvings of the Northwest Indians, which represent animals who have turned into humans. And although we know of no confirmed sightings of animal humans or witches or devils, we do know that certain chemical substances can dramatically change how the mind functions and even how personality is expressed. Our consciousness can be profoundly altered by psychoactive drugs called hallucinogens, most notably LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline, and more commonly, marijuana. A survey of nearly 500 societies around the world reveals that 90% of them practice some culturally patterned form of consciousness alteration, sometimes with the assistance of drugs, and sometimes by meditation or fasting. Experiencing traumatic events, even those deep in one's past, can also alter consciousness. At the University of Pittsburgh, psychologist Jonathan Schooler looks at the controversial phenomenon of recovered or discovered memory.
Recovered memories are situations in which individuals believe they have remembered long-forgotten incidences of abuse. Many researchers in the field believe that these recovered memories are largely the product of therapist suggestion, that is, that they actually didn't happen. Others believe that these are generally true and are actually the product of long-forgotten, repressed memories. What I've been doing is to investigate these cases.
Jonathan Schooler, it's nice to see you.
Good to meet you. And try to find evidence that sometimes, at least, these memories can correspond to actual incidents of abuse.
Schooler's research led him to the case of J.R., whose recollection of having been molested as a child didn't surface until he was an adult. Schooler was interested not only in how memory finally emerged, but in determining if it was true.
We went to a movie called Nuts with Barbra Streisand. Picked it, fairly randomly, fairly much on the spur of the moment. Didn't have any clue what it was about. During the course of the movie, it becomes clear that this female character was abused as a kid. And afterwards, we went out to dinner, and I felt very sort of agitated, kind of distracted that night. We lay down in bed, and Laura knew something was up. And that's when the first memory came to me, and I turned to her at one point and said, what happened to that little girl happened to me.
One of the most important aspects in determining the credibility of a discovered memory is to obtain confirmatory evidence.
Can you tell me about any efforts that you've made to corroborate the abuse that you've described?
I've talked to 4 or 5 people who were also abused by the same person, including some in my family, one of whom was a total stranger who came forward and contacted me after I filed my lawsuit and after he'd seen some other publicity. I confronted the perpetrator. He acknowledged.
It's very difficult to understand how individuals could forget something as traumatic as being molested or raped or seeing a death. And I think that's one of the reasons why many researchers have had trouble believing this phenomenon. I think that the mind is a very mysterious process still, and there are many things we don't understand.
Although controversial, confirmed cases of discovered memory show us just how powerful the conscious and the unconscious domains of the human psyche can be. It was Sigmund Freud, remember, who pioneered exploration of the unconscious. It was there he believed that primal sexual desires, aggressive urges, and painful memories are exiled. According to Freud, these traumatic thoughts and feelings, which threaten to overwhelm the individual if let loose, are forcibly removed from our conscious awareness by the process of repression. But over time, the binds that keep them imprisoned in the unconscious begin to loosen until an alarm goes off. The alarm is acute anxiety, which signals that an escape to conscious awareness is imminent. In order to prevent that escape, new defenses are called upon, ego-defensive mechanisms, which act to restrain the imprisoned thoughts and feelings at all costs. But the more heavy-handed the defenses are, the greater the pressure for escape, and the less energy the person has to deal with reality, until the entire system begins to crack under the strain, and mental illness results. For Freud, this dynamic of the human unconscious influences all our choices, decisions, memories, and dreams. It's even behind those slips of the tongue we call Freudian slips, such as greeting a guest with, "I'm so sad you're here," instead of, "I'm so glad you're here." Errors like that, Freud tells us, are windows into our unconscious feelings, which otherwise might have remained hidden. But contemporary researchers are showing that the unconscious is much more than the storehouse of the unpleasant and forbidden. It represents a basic process we all use regularly. The unconscious operates whenever we feel or act without being aware of what's influencing us, whether it's a stimulus from the current situation or from our past. Gently moving your hand down. Hypnosis is another, often dramatic window on the different levels of consciousness. People who have the special ability to be hypnotized or hypnotize themselves can experience remarkable changes in perception, memory, emotions, behavior, and bodily functions. Pure and deep hypnosis. The hypnotist is merely a coach, facilitating the optimal performance of the subject. Michael, because you're highly hypnotizable, we can begin our hypnosis session today without any elaborate induction. In fact, all we have to do is have you concentrate on the target, which is your thumb. And as I move your hand down, just allow a state of deep relaxation to enter your body. And you feel very comfortably relaxed. And just let yourself go into a very deep, full, comfortable state of hypnosis. Get into a very deep, comfortable state of relaxation. And you know that under hypnosis, you're able to change certain aspects of reality, to visualize things and have those images influence how you think, feel, and act. Now what I'd like to do is a consumer survey. I have here two colognes, a French cologne, which is described as flowery. And I'd like you to smell that, and then I'd like you to compare it with a second cologne. I'd like you to take a deep smell of this, Michael. How would you describe that?
It's pleasant. It's kind of flowery.
Do you think it's something you might wear?
No.
Why?
It's okay, but it's a bit sweet. But it's nice.
Michael, I'd like you now to sample the second cologne. This is a California cologne described as musky. I'd like you to take a deep whiff of this one.
It's more musky. I think it's a bit more masculine.
Which of the two do you like better?
I would probably wear the second one.
Want to take another smell of it?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I'm going to tap you on your shoulder, and when I do, you're going to be alert and refreshed, because I'd like you to sample the colognes again. Okay?
Okay.
Here's the first one, the French cologne. Tell me what you think of it now.
It's nice. It smells a little different than when I was hypnotized. It smelled a little sweeter then, but it's okay.
Would you wear it?
Maybe, but it's a little light for me. It's
Okay, and here's the second one, the California cologne. Tell me what you think of it now.
Oh, no. No. That's awful.
See what that is?
Ammonia. Ooh, no, I think that's something I wouldn't wear.
But you just said that you prefer this, that it smelled musky and masculine.
It smelled a little better in hypnosis.
Psychologists generally believe that hypnosis is a special form of dissociated consciousness. Mike's expectation that he will smell two colognes blocks the usual sensory response to the ammonia.
You said it was a cologne and then it smelled nice, and when I concentrated on that fact, it really did smell okay. It really worked. I thought it smelled great.
After hypnosis, the subject may follow a post-hypnotic suggestion and may have a thought or feeling without conscious knowledge of its hypnotically suggested source, or experience post-hypnotic amnesia, forgetting selected events by suggestion. Hypnosis can also affect biological functioning. One of the most important practical applications of hypnosis is in pain control, used in surgery, dentistry, and childbirth. We'd like to demonstrate the power of hypnosis to alter consciousness and pain control. Laura's entering a deep state of hypnosis, and as she does, she's generating an image which dissociates her consciousness from the immediate environment. Mark, who's not going to be hypnotized, is going to be the control. I'm going to put both of their hands in this ice water, and as I do, they're going to give me a rating from 0 to 10, indicating how distressful it feels. 0 is nothing, 5 is moderate pain, and 10 is the limit of your pain tolerance, at which point I'd like you to take your hand out. So let's time it. I'm going to start the clock now. Mark, what is your rating?
2.
Laura?
1.
3.
Laura?
1.
4.
Laura?
1.
5.
Laura?
1.
7.
Laura?
1.
9.
Laura?
1.
Just try to keep it in as long as you can.
9.
Good. Laura?
1.
9.
Good. Laura?
1.
10.
Laura?
1.
Despite the evidence, it's still hard for most of us to accept the notion that the human mind can act in ways that are contrary to the individual's best interest, or that so much can be swept under the rug of consciousness, with so many important ideas and feelings kept out of sight. But suppose we could illustrate that parts of the mind can actually be separated and can function independently from each other, that the mind can be a double agent, spy and counter-spy at the same time, revealing and concealing, knowing and not knowing, aware and confused. How? By cutting the brain in two and seeing what happens. Patients suffering from otherwise incurable and incapacitating epileptic seizures are often helped if the connection between the two cerebral hemispheres is cut. The two halves of the brain are mirror images of each other, connected by the corpus callosum, a bundle of about 200 million nerve fibers, carrying information to and from each side of the brain. When it's severed, the brain's electrical impulses that cause epileptic seizures are blocked from spreading. In a sense, the brain is divided already. The nervous system is wired so that incoming sensory impulses from our vision or our sense of touch are routed to the opposite side of the brain. So what's seen by the right eye or touched by the right hand is routed to the left hemisphere of the brain, while the right hemisphere picks up signals from the left eye and left hand. Normally, this information is then shared by both sides of the brain via the corpus callosum. But when it's cut, all that changes.
You respond with your left hand.
This demonstration shows the effect of such surgery on epileptic patients. The subject fixes her eyes on the dot at the center of the screen. The right brain sees only the left visual field, and the left brain sees only the right visual field.
6-8.
When a shape is flashed in either the right or the left visual field, the subject is asked to match that shape to one of the two shapes appearing in the bottom of the screen.
6-8.
Sometimes she is asked to point to the shape with her right hand, which the left brain controls, and sometimes with her left hand, which her right brain controls. When the subject has to use her left hand to match a shape that appeared in the right visual field, she makes more mistakes than when she uses her right hand, and vice versa.
6-8.
The sensory messages from the right hand and left visual field and the left hand and right visual field go to opposite sides of the brain. This information cannot be shared because the connection between the two sides has been cut. A further complication of the split brain phenomenon is the fact that each side of the brain is better at some tasks. The right side of the brain is thought to be better at perceptual problems, pattern recognition, and spatial relationships, while the left side seems to be better at language, analysis, and creating explanations. Michael Gazzaniga is conducting research at the Dartmouth Medical School, where he specializes in the psychological study of split brain patients.
What we've learned in looking at these patients is that there needs to be a final common path, a cognitive system that unites and pulls together all the behaviors that come pouring out of us, whether they're actual behaviors or whether they're changes in our moods and what have you. We need a system that allows for integrating this and interpreting it into some kind of continuous story about who we are and what we are and where we're going and where we've been. And studying the neuropsychological patient, the broken brain, as it were, as we say, allows you this insight. It shows you that the brain is organized in terms of many modules, many sub-processes. These separate modules can all create real behaviors. They can create changes in mood. But you certainly don't want a system that has all of these modules running off behaviors with no integration. There's got to be something that pulls all of this together into a theory of who we are and where we are in relationship to the world. And the neuropsychological data from both split brain patients and other focal disease patients suggests that there's something in the left hemisphere that we've called the interpreter that performs this integration, this crucial link for human consciousness. The notion here is that the interpreter turns out to be the essential feature of the human brain that allows for this individual stamp, as it were, on our lives, because it is pulling together our own personal events, our own personal responses to the environment, and giving them an interpretation. And that is going to be the system that's going to be responsible for our unique view and our unique sense of self that we all think we possess.
Some neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists believe that if the brain is in fact a confederacy of modules, it might work like this. One module might deal only with recognizing faces, another with mathematical calculations, a third with perceiving angles, and so on. These highly specialized multi-minds are then moved into consciousness temporarily, and then moved out when no longer needed. But when the wrong mind module is moved in, or isn't moved out fast enough, we're in trouble. The result is an error in judgment. So, where does this leave us? With a mind that hides what it doesn't want to accept? A consciousness that doesn't know the whole plot? A cast of character actors ready to improvise new roles, and a brain brimming with scriptwriters who don't always know what the others are up to or what they want. It's an awesome task to bring them all together, to create one integrated self, as we'll see next time. Until then, I'm Philip Zimbardo.
Of our government, it was a tremendous shock. As the Fifth Estate was first to report in 1984, the work that Dr. Ewan Cameron oversaw at his Montreal clinic was shocking. Now the story of Cameron's experiments and the victims' struggle for justice have been made into a riveting movie to be broadcast on CBC television this Sunday and Monday nights. For the victims of the sleep room, the horror has never really ended. Even if you don't know the history of the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, it looks like a natural setting for a movie. A horror movie, maybe. But then, the truth about what happened to hundreds of psychiatric patients there a long time ago is a horror story.
Okay, so we're en route, guys. A piece of Leon.
And now, it has become a movie. A dramatized account of a bleak chapter in the history of Canadian psychiatry, produced by a former Fifth Estate documentary maker, Bernard Zuckerman.
Literally could not make change for $1.
The central character in the TV movie is a world-renowned psychiatrist at the Allen in the early 60s. His name was Dr. Ewan Cameron.
Dr. Cameron.
It's the classic story of good turning to evil in its most simplistic terms. I mean, Dr. Cameron started off as someone who was probably one of the most enlightened psychiatrists in the country. But then something happened. And whatever happened, suddenly here is this enlightened doctor, this noble doctor, who begins doing more and more and more bizarre experiments on his patients to the point where he is destroying the minds of hundreds of people.
These are the days, and ours are the occasions.
Inspired by the exuberant post-war optimism in technology, Cameron thought he'd achieved a major scientific breakthrough: how to repair a damaged human mind. The media rejoiced, even coined a phrase which would become a tragically silly oxymoron: beneficial brainwashing. Linda MacDonald was a young mother with 5 children under the age of 5 when she started feeling low. Her family doctor knew just the man to make her better.
I was tired, I was depressed, my back was hurting. And so he said to the children's father, why don't you go to Montreal and visit this Dr. Ewan Cameron, this famous man who has all of these accolades, and have an assessment. So we went. My medical file even says that I took my guitar with me. And that was the end of my life. Within 3 weeks, Dr. Cameron decided to call me an acute schizophrenic and ship me up to the sleep room.
How long did they put you to sleep for?
I was in a coma for 86 days.
86 days of unbroken sleep.
Yeah. Total comatose state.
The theory was simple: erase a disturbed mind and start all over again. One of Dr. Cameron's colleagues at the time was Dr. Peter Roper.
The aim, I think, really was to wipe out the patterns of thought and behavior which were detrimental to the patient, which were sick, and replace them with healthy patterns of thought and behavior. I think this may have been stimulated by the effects of the American prisoners of war in Korea, how they seem to have been brainwashed.
The movie, called The Sleep Room, dramatizes one technique for brainwashing: extreme sessions of electroshock therapy, massive jolts of electricity 3 or 4 times a day for weeks. According to her hospital records, Linda MacDonald had 100 of these treatments. She entered hospital for treatment of what we can now guess was postpartum depression. Her records show the results of shock and radical drug therapy. May 15th shows some confusion. June 3rd knows her name, but that's about all. June 11th, doesn't know her name.
I had to be toilet trained. I was a vegetable. I had no identity. I had no memory. I'd never existed in the world before. Like a baby. Just like a baby that has to be toilet trained.
She eventually went home, her depression gone, and her entire previous life gone with it.
And this is one of the twins. That was in '62 before I went to the Allen. And this is the same one, I think. I just look at the pictures and I know who that is, who they are, but I don't remember them as my children at all. I mean, I know that they came from my body, but there's no, that's all. I don't know, and that's because I was told that. So these are my children.
Robert Logie was little more than a child himself when he was referred to Dr. Cameron. He was 18. He had a sore leg. His doctor thought it was all in his head and sent him to the Allen. Like Linda MacDonald, he went through a nightmare of shock therapy and drugs, including LSD.
Well, I was given LSD about every second day and injected. And sometimes it was mixed with sodium amytal and other drugs.
Idiot, part 1 on 1, take 2. Yep.
Most of the drugs were experimental, but seemed suitable for brainwashing, or as Cameron preferred to call it, de-patterning. Then, during the long sleep, the patient would be forced to listen to subliminal messages that were supposed to print new, sometimes bizarre thoughts on his blank mind.
I was aware of the speaker under my pillow. I was aware of the words.
Which were?
You killed your mother.
You killed your mother?
Yeah.
Who was alive and well?
Who was alive and well. And
over and over again, this voice is
well, like I say, it just takes about 2 seconds to say that message. And this was going on for 23 days. And when I went home, after being there, and when I went home, my mother was there, and why was she there? And it didn't make any sense.
So what was going on here? Dr. Ewan Cameron was at one point head of the World Psychiatric Association and is still admired by some of his former colleagues. Dr. Peter Roper.
What is the possibility that we had a good, well-motivated man whose ego and ambition took charge of his professionalism and led him into some fairly dark places?
Well, I would put that chance as pretty slight. I think it's more likely that if he'd been around to defend himself when this story came out, we'd have a totally different picture of it.
What would he say? Put yourself in his shoes. What would he say?
I think he'd say, look, I treated these patients to the best of my ability. I didn't get all of them well, but most of them I got better than they were.
A travesty, I agree.
But in the movie, Dr. Cameron will not come off so well.
They're your patients. Most of these people were discharged as cured.
It accurately shows that many of his patients, inaccurately diagnosed as schizophrenics, were permanently damaged by his methods. Eventually, even Cameron had doubts about his experiments. He left the Allen in 1964, died of a heart attack 3 years later. By then, the hospital had quietly abandoned the experiments.
Destroy these people for nothing. You can't just walk away from this, Cameron. It'll come out and it'll ruin you. You can't walk away.
Nobody knows for sure exactly how many people Dr. Cameron and his colleagues exposed to the program of chemical and electroshock treatment they called de-patterning and psychic driving, a process which some experts have since called barbaric. But many years would pass before there would be any public or official acknowledgement of what those damaged patients had been through. It would take a dramatic disclosure in the late 70s that the Allen Memorial had been part of a Cold War program of brainwashing experiments, paid for in part by the CIA. Hidden among its most sensitive files were CIA records documenting a project called MK Ultra, Between 1957 and 1961, a CIA front funneled about $62,000 U.S. for brainwashing research by Dr. Ewan Cameron. The American media got the story first, but the Fifth Estate exposed the magnitude of the human tragedy.
Experimental drugs, including LSD, were administered to human guinea pigs. The patients were never told that their treatment was part of a CIA experiment.
I don't think we'll have radishes.
One of those patients was Velma Orlico of Winnipeg. She'd been at the Allen in the late 50s for treatment of depression. She happened to be married to a member of Parliament, David Orlico of the NDP. She'd considered Dr. Cameron a near saint. Now she was being told she'd been betrayed by him.
It was an awful feeling to realize when I found this out that the man whom I had thought cared about what happened to me didn't give a damn. I was a fly. Just a fly.
First, she felt hurt. Then she got angry and decided to sue one of the most powerful institutions in the world, the CIA.
As a matter of fact, when she said she wanted to sue the CIA, I said, "You're crazy. How can a hick from Winnipeg sue the CIA?"
But she did, along with 8 other former patients, a massive lawsuit that would consume many years and become an obsession for a distinguished American civil liberties lawyer named Joseph Rao.
Cameron, all he did was what the CIA was in effect asking him to do, and what he said he was going to do, and he did it.
Rao and a young assistant named James Turner knew they were up against a formidable opponent in the CIA, but they thought the odds would be evened a bit by help from a natural ally. They were in for a disappointment.
But we expected to have a very potent ally in the form of the Canadian government. And unfortunately, instead of helping their own citizens because the Canadian government was worried about its possible liability, the Mulroney government, in effect, stabbed its citizens in the back at every turn in the litigation.
Ottawa actually helped suppress a key piece of information, evidence that CIA officials at the U.S. Embassy had actually apologized to the Canadian government when the CIA experiments were first revealed. Jim Turner is still flabbergasted.
You got to understand how important these apologies and expressions of regret were. This is an admission. This is legally admissible in court because it is one of the parties to litigation saying, "I did something wrong and I'm sorry I did it." That is prima facie evidence of negligence and of wrongdoing that goes a long, long way to bringing the case to a timely conclusion instead of the protracted 10 years of litigation that we had.
And action.
Mr. Mulroney.
The movie underscores the impact of Ottawa's refusal to give the lawyers details of the CIA apology. The lawyers eventually upped the ante on the Fifth Estate.
And action.
Tonight on the Fifth Estate, startling revelations about the activities of the CIA in Canada.
With the publicity wave gathering momentum and the strength of the victim's case becoming more apparent, the CIA caved in the day before the trial was to begin. They settled out of court for $750,000. At the time, it was the largest settlement the CIA had ever awarded, and it provides a dramatic finale for the movie.
Because we made them. They couldn't beat us. We won. You write that down, mister.
Producer Bernard Zuckerman says besides the financial terms, this was a major moral victory.
Here you've got 9 little Canadian victims taking on probably the most powerful institution in America, the CIA, and these little Canadians, they win. They get the CIA to settle and give them money and, in effect, an apology saying what we did is wrong.
The movie ends with a CIA settlement, but the story didn't end there. Troubling questions would persist, especially about the government of Canada. So why was Ottawa so ambiguous when it came to helping some Canadian citizens get compensation from Washington for what they endured in a program that was inspired mostly by American Cold War fears? Well, the answer was simple. The government of Canada was even more deeply involved in the Allen Memorial experiments than the Americans. Dr. Cameron's experiments were funded to the tune of $500,000 by the Federal Department of Health and Welfare during the 50s, and the funding didn't stop then. They kicked in over $51,000 after the CIA project ended in 1961, which was when a young, stressed-out mother named Linda MacDonald became part of the Allen Memorial story. When she discovered that her own government had been funding brainwashing experiments on her, she made a dramatic decision.
You decided to take on the government of Canada.
Oh, sure. Well, hey, considering what I'd already been through, that was a snap. You know, what else? Why not?
It must have become obvious to you fairly quickly that you were ramming your head into a brick wall.
Yes. I'm stubborn, too. It got to the point where every time, whether it was John Crosby or Raina Titian or then the Honorable King Campbell, it got to be, you guys, we're gonna stay alive. And I said that to Brian Mulrooney, too. If you think I'm going away, you've got another thing coming. I'm not going to go away.
I finally discovered...
Linda MacDonald would hound the federal government for 4 years before finally in 1992, Ottawa grudgingly agreed to compensate her and some of Dr. Cameron's other victims $100,000 each in exchange for signing away the right to sue the government or the hospital. But it was an ambiguous victory. Ottawa refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing at the Allen, a conclusion backed up by a legal review of what happened there. The report by a prominent progressive conservative lawyer relied partly on expert advice from Dr. Frederick Grunberg, one of Quebec's leading psychiatrists, who made two controversial assertions: that patients hadn't suffered irreparable harm and that they had consented to the treatment.
Well, what I meant is that the patients who were admitted at the Allen Memorial Institute were patients who went in voluntarily. So the sort of consent they gave is what was done was a sort of general consent to the hospital, the sort of consent that was given for surgery or for any other procedure.
Consent had nothing to do with it. Dr. Cameron did not describe the treatment. He did not clarify. He did not give any way, shape, or form any kind of a hint of what was going to happen. That's not consent. And I don't even know whether he talked to me, because I'll never remember anyway.
Dr. Grunberg shares a widely held view in his profession about the legacy of Dr. Ewan Cameron.
I think he was a misguided man. He worked on a sort of a poor theoretical basis, and I think he was imprudent, considering. But I am convinced, and I'm still convinced, that he really wanted a therapeutic breakthrough. He had this motivation that he was going to break this terrible condition.
You seem to be saying the things that Cameron did were awful, but he meant well, so we'll forgive him. And the victims or the patients will have to live with the consequences.
It's not a question of forgiving. As I say, the thing is, we put what he was doing in the perspective of his time. And a lot of awful things were going on.
A lot of people are saying, considering the accepted practice and the science available at the time, this was an appropriate thing to do to you. What?
It wasn't treatment, if that's what you're suggesting. It wasn't treatment for anything, not a toenail or anything. It was out and out guinea pigs for brainwashing experiments. That's what it was.
It's been more than 33 years since the Allen put an end to the practices initiated by its most notorious doctor. It has recovered its world-class reputation as a leader in the treatment of mental illness. Dr. Peter Roper was dismissed from the Allen 2 years after Dr. Cameron left. One of the reasons, he insisted on following Dr. Cameron's technique.
You argued strenuously to continue the depatterning of your patients.
Well, I felt that I had a duty to my patients to give them the best possible treatment. And if there were some that were not responding to any other form of treatment, the only thing left was the patterning for them, then I felt that should be done.
You sound almost nostalgic for the 50s and 60s.
Oh no, it's not nostalgia. It's a question I think that bothers a lot of doctors, that it's rather sad if they're prevented from having that treatment because of administrative, political, or other reasons which have nothing to do with good medical practice.
For Linda MacDonald, good medical practice in 1963 turned an emotional crisis into a horror that would haunt a lifetime.
Here we are. This feels strange.
This spring, she returned to the Ottawa High School, where she graduated in 1957.
Hi, Linda. I'm Ann. Aren't you Highland? How are you? Hi. I was in the Liars Club. I don't know if you remember. I don't remember at all. No, I guess not.
And all of these people, we knew all of these people.
She has no memory of this place or those times, or even of who she was back then.
Oh, here I am. Look at me. Did they call me Linda? Yeah.
I am who I am today. My family tells me that I am very much like the Linda that they knew when I was growing up. Gregarious, always tough.
Problem. As the patient relived the operation in her mind, the truth came out. Even though she had been unconscious, she had heard the surgeon say that she might have cancer. This news was so traumatic that it plunged her into depression, even though it turned out to be false. The surgeon's comment had been buried in her subconscious mind, normally unavailable to her conscious awareness, unless retrieved by special methods, such as hypnosis.
In experiments following this case, both negative and positive messages were given by anesthesiologists to different surgery patients while they were under anesthesia. None of the patients reported any awareness of what happened during the operation. However, under hypnosis, some of those exposed to negative messages gave an almost verbatim account of the anesthesiologist's comments, while others showed extreme anxiety. Another group of patients who were exposed to positive comments during their operations needed smaller amounts of painkillers after surgery and were discharged earlier than those in groups who heard only silence or music during their operations. We should note, however, that subconscious processing during anesthesia is complex and difficult to demonstrate reliably.
This phenomenon of subconscious awareness raises some profound questions about the nature of the human mind and how it functions to tune us into or out of the world around us. Can events and experiences taking place below the level of consciousness really alter our moods, bias our actions, and even in tales of witches' potions and voodoo possession, in stories of the devil who takes over and directs the souls of his victims. And we see it in the carvings of the Northwest Indians, which represent animals who have turned into humans. And although we know of no confirmed sightings of animal humans or witches or devils, we do know that certain chemical substances can dramatically change how the mind functions and even how personality is expressed. Our consciousness can be profoundly altered by psychoactive drugs called hallucinogens, most notably LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline, and more commonly, marijuana. A survey of nearly 500 societies around the world reveals that 90% of them practice some culturally patterned form of consciousness alteration, sometimes with the assistance of drugs, and sometimes by meditation or fasting. Experiencing traumatic events, even those deep in one's past, can also alter consciousness. At the University of Pittsburgh, psychologist Jonathan Schooler looks at the controversial phenomenon of recovered or discovered memory. Recovered memories are situations in which individuals believe they have remembered long-forgotten incidences of abuse. Many researchers in the field believe that these change our health And why are we unaware of what this hidden consciousness knows?
In Western civilization, it has been traditionally held that reason, free choice, and carefully weighed decisions guide our actions. We assume that we have ready access to our most significant thoughts, feelings, and memories, that it is truly possible to know thyself. At the same time, the brain has been seen as a monolithic command center that can know everything because it is master of all it surveys. But recent experiments in neuroscience suggest an alternative conception. It seems that our brains are organized into many separate mini-brains, or cognitive modules. Each of these is designed to do a specific job, such as speaking, or reading, or drawing. Moreover, our minds are devoted to concealing some truths we would rather not face, either unpleasant memories or even current experiences. And so, to know thyself, one needs to explore the murky realm of the unconscious and the subconscious, where consciousness can take on various disguises. Throughout history, people have been fascinated and frightened by the idea of a sudden transformation of identity, from our conscious selves to something beyond our control, as shown here in an early film version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We see this notion. Is it possible to relive an operation in your subconscious? Just try to keep it as long as you can. Can your mind shut out the pain of extreme cold?
Fixate.
How does the right eye trick the left hand? The mind, hidden and divided, this time on Discovering Psychology.
Consider an ordinary operation under anesthesia. The patient is unconscious. All indicators are normal. But then the surgeon finds a growth that could be malignant. He says out loud that the patient may have cancer. Fortunately, it's a false alarm. The growth is benign. The operation is successful, and the prognosis is excellent. The patient should feel fine in a few days, but for some reason, she doesn't.
The patient became listless and moody after the operation. No one could understand why, least of all her. Finally, as her depression deepened, she sought help from a therapist who decided to use hypnosis to explore the cause of her recovered memories are largely the product of therapist suggestion, that is, that they actually didn't happen. Others believe that these are generally true and are actually the product of long-forgotten, repressed memories. What I've been doing is to investigate these cases.
Jonathan Spiller, it's nice to see you. Good to meet you.
And try to find evidence that sometimes, at least, these memories can correspond to actual incidents of abuse.
Schooler's research led him to the case of J.R., whose recollection of having been molested as a child didn't surface until he was an adult. Schooler was interested not only in how memory finally emerged, but in determining if it was true.
We went to a movie called Nuts with Barbra Streisand. Picked it, fairly randomly, fairly much on the spur of the moment. Didn't have any clue what it was about. During the course of the movie, it becomes clear that this female character was abused as a kid. And afterwards, we went out to dinner, and I felt very sort of agitated, kind of distracted that night. We lay down in bed, and Laura knew something was up. And that's when the first memory came to me. And I turned to her at one point and said, what happened to that little girl happened to me.
One of the most important aspects in determining the credibility of a discovered memory is to obtain confirmatory evidence.
Can you tell me about any efforts that you've made to corroborate the abuse that you've described?
I've talked to 4 or 5 people who were also abused by the same person, including some in my family.